Did you ever get a really important phone call? Maybe it's one you were waiting for, like after a job interview and you're expecting to hopefully be offered the job. Or maybe it was a time for somebody in your family to have a baby, and so you're just, waiting for the phone to ring. Or maybe you got an important call you weren't expecting. Back in the Michael Jordan era, moment of silence, please, for the Michael Jordan era. Thank you very much. Back in MJ's day, I was watching Game 6 of the Bulls versus the Knicks in the conference finals, and as I was watching, a buddy of mine called and said he had tickets for Game 7 and asked me if I wanted to go. And I got to go, and it was awesome. It was amazing. Started with a phone call. Sometimes unexpected calls lead to something unexpectedly good. Today we're starting a brand new series called My Story. And I can't hear the word story without thinking about the work of one of my favorite authors, Don Miller. Any Don Miller fans in the house? Don Miller wrote a best-selling book called Blue Like Jazz, and the book was actually made into a major motion picture. Well, anyways, Miller's favorite thing to write about is how our lives are meant to be like great stories, and that we won't find fulfillment in life unless we let God help us find ways to live better and better, more interesting, more compelling stories. And that's what this series is all about. Friends, here we go. Things in your life are not just happening. Okay? Things aren't just happening. God's up to something. God wants to make your life into a story worth telling and retelling. And to help us with our stories, each week we're going to walk through the story of a particular person in the Bible that I'm pretty sure we've not ever talked about around here at any length before. His story is from the Old Testament, and his name was Elisha. Somebody say Elisha. 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 Elisha lived in ancient Israel back in the 9th century BC, obviously, a long time ago. But his story, in many ways, is so much like our stories. Here's the backstory. Back in the day, the people of Israel, they were the specially designated people of God, especially chosen to bless the world for God. But things just weren't going so hot. King Ahab and his wife Jezebel were in power, and they were leading the people in all sorts of directions. They're leading the people into idolatry and all sorts of messed up stuff. So God raised up the prophet Elijah to lead the people back to where they were meant to be. Now, Elijah and Elisha are obviously very similar sounding names, but don't let the similarity fool you. Elijah became the greatest, most powerful prophet God's people had ever known. But eventually Elijah's career as a leader begins drawing to an end, and it was time for him to pass the torch of leadership on to somebody new, and that's where Elisha comes in. All right, here we go. From the Old Testament. Elijah went out and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." All right? That's from 1 Kings chapter 19. Here's where Elisha's story starts. Elisha is out working the fields of the family estate. And from all we can tell, it was a pretty big farm, because it says there's 12 pairs of oxen plowing at once. And to have 12 pair of oxen plowing at once, that'd be a pretty big farm. So they're apparently pretty well off. And so Elisha's out plowing, and Elijah comes up and throws his cloak around him. But when Elijah throws his cloak around him, this isn't just some ordinary article of clothing. I mean, this is the special prophet's cloak, the special article of clothing only a prophet of the Lord wore back in the day. And Elijah putting his cloak around Elisha, this was a heavy-duty symbolic act. This was God's call on Elisha's life to begin a whole new story, a whole new life as a prophet apprentice to the greatest man of God of Elisha's time. Now, we don't know much about Elisha, except that he was driving the 12th pair of oxen. He was at the back of the pack. Now, some biblical scholars say this little detail tells us that Elisha was the youngest in the family, or that for one reason or another, he had the least status in the family. I mean, he's driving the 12th pair of oxen out of 12. Get the picture here? Not where in the line you want to be, bringing up the rear behind, 11 other teams of oxen, if you know what I mean. From all we can tell, there was nothing special or extraordinary about Elisha as a person. And my guess is that a lot of us feel that way about ourselves. I mean, maybe you see yourself as kind of an ordinary clock in, clock out. Sometimes maybe you feel like just a cog in the machine. Maybe a lot of days going unnoticed, maybe unappreciated, and at the end of the day, kind of feeling like the 12th man in the oxen line. But for the great Elijah to come to Elisha and place his cloak on him, this was huge. Elijah was basically saying to Elisha, "You're next in line." And not the plowing line. This was the man of God line. This moment is a call for Elisha to start walking in the footsteps of Elijah. So what's Elisha going to do? I mean, does he start living a new story now that he's received this call in his life? I mean, does he say goodbye to his life as he knows it? Truth is, some invitations are easy to say yes to. Like tickets to Game 7 of the conference finals between the Bulls and the Knicks. But other invites, not so much, not so easy to say yes to. I don't believe this choice for Elisha was an easy one. I mean, being God's spokesperson back in the day, that wasn't a job that came with a nice office, regular hours, and vacation pay. Prophets in the day were often at odds with the establishment. They were usually outsiders who were distrusted and often persecuted by the powers that be. Elisha might have been thinking, 12th man in the oxen line might not be that bad a gig after all. And here's why I'm pointing this out. If something new is going to start in my life and your life, it's going to mean change and uncertainty and often adversity. I mean, yeah, change can be exciting, but it can be intimidating too. Change can be scary. Don Miller, the guy that I was mentioning who writes a lot about living a better story, he puts it like this. He says, "The great stories go to those who don't give in to fear. Fear is an emotion that can trick us into living a boring life." Man, I like that. So fear can get in the way of important things starting in our stories. But it's not just fear. There's also, maybe feelings of inadequacy. I mean, whether it's starting a new business or a new relationship or a new chapter of, taking better care of ourselves physically or whatever, we can feel like, what's the use? Because, so many times we've tried new things and we failed before, or we feel like we just don't have what it takes. So easy to feel like we're just not up to what starting something new in our lives might mean, isn't it? And I believe Elisha, he's like us. He's having to deal with all this stuff that could stop him from starting. And from all we can tell, whatever reservations and trepidation he might have had, Elisha went for it. And when he did, when he said yes to God's call in his life, a whole new story started. And here's what Elisha's story has to do with you and me. Whatever important new thing that's starting in your life right now or about to start, here's what I believe is going on, regardless of the particulars of your situation. Look at this word from the Bible. This is from the New Testament, from the book of Ephesians. It says this. It says, "Follow God's example as dearly loved children and walk in the way of love, as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us." Okay, here's why I mentioned that verse from Ephesians right now. Here's what it has to do with Elisha and you. Whatever new good thing is starting in your life, whatever change is taking place in your story or needs to take place in your story, here's what I believe. The new thing that God is calling you to, whatever else it's about, it's always about moving into a life of what the Bible calls walking in the way of love. Walking in the way of love. See, back in the day, people walked most places. So walking was a euphemism for living, and going about your life. So walking in love means living a life of love. And when I say living a life of love, let's be really clear here, friends. We're not talking about, becoming just a nicer, softer spoken, touchy-feely person. No. It's a kind of love that's about living life in an outwardly focused way. Focused on how we can bless others and bless the world and not just live for ourselves. Let me give you an example of how I think everything's about this. For instance, recovery from addiction. Recovery is not about just, not drinking or not drugging or not doing whatever it is anymore. Recovery is not about just getting clean and sober. Real recovery is about becoming a person who's changed and is now learning to walk in the way of love instead of just walking in the way of self. Am I making sense? I mean, whatever needs to start in my life, whether it's a new chapter in my spiritual life or a new chapter in my marriage or even starting a new business, it's not about just having a better life for me. It's about becoming somebody who walks in the way of love, lives a life of love as a dearly loved son or daughter of God. It's about being someone who's willing to sacrifice for others and live to make other lives better, just like Jesus did for me, for you, for us. I mean, friends, God is a giver and a lover, and He's calling us to be that. See, that's a story worth starting. And this is where our story starts, or at least where God wants every single one of our stories to start, with embracing our identity as dearly loved sons and daughters and learning to walk in the way of love. Because that's exactly what happens when somebody says yes to start following Jesus. I mean, just as the great Elijah called ordinary Elisha to begin following him and learning from him, God's calling you and me to follow him one way or another in Jesus. This is the most important start a person could ever make, could ever have. It's the most important invitation, the most important call of a person's entire life story. And I know there's all sorts of reasons to not say yes to the new start, right? I mean, some people say, oh, well, before I become a Christ follower, I got to stop doing this or I got to stop doing that. Somebody else will say, oh, before I become a Christ follower, I got to know more or I got to, become a better person or, make up for some bad stuff in my past. For others of us, there's other reasons we think we can't start. Some might say, well, I can't become a Christ follower because I don't think I can ever change. Or, I can't become a Christ follower because I just got too many doubts, too many unanswered questions. Do you ever feel that way? Well, if you do, I got good news. The start, this particular start, it doesn't really start with you. It doesn't start with you having it all figured out and have it all together. It starts with God calling you. Listen, a man named Jesus claimed to be God in the flesh and claimed to have power over sin and death. And making those claims got him killed. But when he died, he rose from the dead, and all those claims turned out to be true. And if you think you can't follow him because you're not the religious type or, you don't want to become, some judgmental, intolerant, hypocritical type of person, who calls themselves Christian, if that's not who you want to be, good. Jesus doesn't want you to start being like that either. If you don't want to become a judgmental, intolerant, religious elitist, neither does he. The Jesus I know has no interest in making you or me more religious or making you into one of those kind of religious-y people. He is interested, he is committed in helping you start walking more and more in the way of love, just like him. But I know there's other reasons not to start. And here's a biggie for a lot of people I talk to. I don't really need to become a Christ follower. I'm a pretty good person. Let's be really clear here. Following Jesus is not about how good a person you are compared to other people in the world. See, there's this thing that's true of every human being on the planet, from the really good ones like, Mother Teresa and Francis of Assisi, all the way down to murderers and, people that we think of real lowly. There's one thing everybody has in common. And you can see it. Read the writings of the most spiritual people you admire, and they'll tell you that they have a problem they just can't solve. See if this feels familiar or sounds familiar. Here's some words from the Bible, from the book of Romans. It says, for I do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. This verse is so important. You read the personal stories of the great souls down through history who get so much credit for being such awesome people, and they'll tell you that no matter how many good things they do, there's still just this regular daily experience of doing all sorts of things that are wrong and selfish and petty and self-absorbed, as well as all the things that they fail to do that they're supposed to do that are right and good. I mean, you can see it for yourself. Read the writings of the great souls of history, and what you'll find is that no matter how holy or super spiritual they were, at their very best, they still had a problem. They just couldn't stop being somebody who fails to do so many things they know are right and good on the one hand. And then they keep succeeding in doing the exact opposite of doing the things that aren't right and aren't good. I mean, I'll just speak real personally. For me as a married guy, for instance, I want to be a good husband who really loves his wife. And lots of times I succeed. At least I hope it's lots of times. But every day, the truth is, every day I fail to love my wife like I want to. So many times, I'm short with her, or I'm impatient, or I'm inconsiderate, or self-absorbed. And I don't just mean when I'm having a bad day. The best day I ever have as a husband is tainted by all sorts of petty, unkind, selfish stuff. And that's just in the husband part of my life. The same thing's true of me as a dad and a friend and a neighbor and as somebody who wants to be on mission for God to change the world. No matter how many good things I do or good traits I have, I'm just flat out incapable of being able to stop messing things up. I mean, is that just me? Please tell me it's not just me. Actually, I know it's not just me. I know it's not. One of the most spiritually amazing people I've ever known. She's this little old lady in her 80s. She's maybe in her 90s now. And she spent her life helping people recover from the trauma of sexual abuse. I mean, she's a brilliant author and a counselor and a leader. And in this one talk I heard her give one time, I heard her say, no matter how hard I try, the truth is there's a rat in me. That's what she said. Those are her words about herself. And that's the truth about me too. And I think you too. Not a single one of us goes a single day without being unkind or unloving or dishonest or self-absorbed. That's just the truth about all of us. I mean, that's why in that same part of the Bible that I just read to you a minute ago, what you see on the screen, it says it right now. It says it this way. It goes on to say, wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body of death? That's from the next part in Romans. And that word wretched there, when it says wretched man that I am, that doesn't mean, no good, dirty, low-down piece of whatever. Wretched there means worn out from trying. Worn out from trying and failing, trying and failing, trying and failing. And like I said, talk to the most spiritual, got-it-together person you know, and they will say that they know what it means to come to the place in their life where they say, wretched person that I am, I can't save myself from myself. I need somebody else to save me, to change me, to transform me, to help me get a new start. And that's why the next part from Romans says this. After that it says, I just know this by heart. It says, thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. That's Romans 7:25. Why does it say that? Well, because the writer is saying, thank God that even though I can't save myself, I can't fix myself, Jesus can. I can't ever be who I really want to be. Some days are better than others, sure, but overall, I just can't. But in Jesus, God can. Let me tell you about Dan. Dan was a senior in high school. He was at the Blast Winter Conference, student community retreat that our student ministry does every year. In fact, it's actually coming up here, and I think within the next couple of weeks, actually, Blast. If you're a junior high or high schooler, you want to be at Blast. And the last night of Blast some years ago, anybody who wanted to say yes to a new start in Jesus was given the chance to say yes through baptism. And it was this really high energy atmosphere. The music was high energy, and before long, man, the stage was just soaking wet from students getting baptized, just bunches of them. And Dan comes walking up to one of our leaders, and he says, I know what's been keeping me from saying yes to Jesus. And then after a brief pause, he said, it's me. And so he said yes that night. He didn't have all his questions answered. He didn't have his he didn't have his act all together. He just knew that he was powerless to be the person that God meant for him to be and that he wanted to be. And the only thing holding him back from the new start God was calling him to in Jesus was himself. So he admitted that and said yes to the call, and a whole new story started in his life. Years ago, we had the privilege of having Gordon MacDonald come to our church to speak. Gordon MacDonald's a world-renowned speaker and best-selling author. He pastored a large church up in New England for many years. And he shared with us how one day he and his wife were doing some spring cleaning and they were flipping mattresses. And you know how awkward a king mattress can be when you're trying to flip it. You got two people and you're trying to turn it on end and, flip it over without it flipping over on you. And he said that just as he had it propped up, like all the way, the phone rang. And for some reason, his wife went and answered it. All right? So he's standing there and he's holding the mattress up and she says to him, it's the president. He said he thought she was kidding, but she wasn't. It was during the Clinton administration, and Bill Clinton was calling to ask Gordon MacDonald to become one of his personal spiritual advisors as he tried to navigate the whole Monica Lewinsky thing. Now, regardless of your politics, that's a huge opportunity, wouldn't you say? I mean, not every day the president calls and extends an invitation like that. And Gordon MacDonald shared with us what it was like to get to try and be an advisor to the president on spiritual things during the biggest crisis in the life of the president. And that important part of the story of his life, of Gordon MacDonald's life, when he got to do that, it all came when he answered the call. We put together a brand new resource for everybody to use during this series to help us figure out and reflect on what God's doing in the story of our lives. It's just a simple handout that you can get at your campus today, or you can download it on our website. And what we do is we take passages of Scripture from the Bible and then just try to respond journal style by simply completing 3 sentences as best we can after we read what God has to say to us through the Bible. It'll tell you what to read, and then it has these 3 sentences to complete. First, it'll say, I was blank. And then you can just write whatever was going on in your life up till now, where there needs to be change. I was. It's about the beginning of a start. And then it says, then God, talking about some new God thing, something new that God might be doing in our lives. So it's, I was, then God. And then the third part of it just says simply, now I'm. And you can fill in the blank there. And it gives space to journal some about what's happening now in your life that you want to continue. It's a simple resource, but it's a great resource. I hope you'll take advantage of it. It'll help you figure out your story. And here's what this is all about today. Okay? One day, a great prophet came up to an ordinary guy and asked him to start a new story. And right here, right now, whatever else God is calling you to start in the story of your life, someone far greater than Elijah is speaking to you right now. And I surely don't mean me. Through His Spirit right now, I believe God is saying to everybody here just what it says in the Bible. Follow God's example as dearly loved children and walk in the way of love as Christ loved us and gave Himself up for us. Start. Every story's got to start. Start walking in the way of love in your marriage. Start walking in the way of love as a neighbor. Start walking in the way of love in your personal habits and your decisions. Start walking in the way of love in your finances, walking in the way of love in your workplace or your school. Start walking in the way of love, so that all that you are and all that you have can be brought to bear to bless others and change lives in God's name. And most of all, start walking in the way of love by saying yes to being a follower of Jesus, the one who gave Himself up for you.